Welcome back to the One Question Leadership Podcast. I'm Glenn Caruso, head football coach at the University of St. Thomas, and so happy you tuned in. You know, quite often we get so caught up in the daily grind of work or coaching or recruiting that we don't often take time to reflect. I would encourage everybody to take just a few minutes each day to try and see the bigger picture, to stop and realize that in the end, we're going to be judged on what we choose to believe, who we choose to love, and what we decide to leave behind in the hearts and minds of not just our players, not just our coworkers, but also our children. And remember, if we're doing it right, we're coaching football for life.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Dave Brown. Dave is the founder and president of Gridiron. Greetings, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
Ty, thank you so much for having me, and a pleasure to be here.
Yes, sir. I'm excited to have you on. Now, you'll have to help me here, but what I have down here is that Gridiron is a software program that can identify all options for types of games needed for scheduling, and you assist with football scheduling, essentially with Division I college football, FBS and FCS. Now, help me out with that in terms of describing what Gridiron actually is.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good description, but just to get into it a little bit deeper, when somebody has an opening for a game, they have a pretty good idea of what they'd like to do with that particular schedule opening. So they may want to buy an FCS team on that date. They may want to sell a game to another FBS institution if they're an FBS school and get a guarantee for it that helps them hit their budget. Or they may want to buy a game. You know, if you're a guy from the SEC or the Big Ten or the ACC, they may want to buy a game and pay a guarantee. So whenever you have a particular scheduling need where you are specifically trying to find a certain type of game, you can just log right into Gridiron, and you can, if you're trying to buy a game, you can look for all the teams that are looking to sell a game on that particular date. And that really is the underlying idea behind the software. Now, there are many other things that go along with that, but if that's really the main purpose of Gridiron. And you know, past that a little bit, there are 10 conferences in the FBS, and those conferences spend a fair amount of time making sure that they can get everybody a game in a certain week. And so another part of what I do with the conferences in particular is just to line everything up so that, say, for instance, they can get everybody a game in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, just so that nobody's taking an early bye and playing 11, 10 games in a row. And so that's another facet of what I work on for the conferences and the schools to a certain extent. We just go in, work with everybody across the landscape, and really make sure that we can find a solution so that everybody gets their bye put in the right place, and that they just have a balanced schedule that competitively meets their needs, where they're not going on the road for 3 weeks in a row or something like that.
It sounds like a very complex setup there. And your background kind of is what led you to it. You most recently, before you started Gridiron, VP of Programming at ESPN. I mean, you spent time in programming for ESPN College Basketball, Longhorn Network. You've done a number of things, essentially main role being the lead football scheduler over 27 years at ESPN. Background, engineer before that. So I wonder, before we even get to some of the nuances of Gridiron, I wonder about, going from an engineer, getting on at ESPN, how do you become the lead programmer at a company that you actually grew with the company, right? I mean, over the last almost 30 years, the company grew tremendously. Tell me about that aspect of going from engineering to programming.
Ty, I think I was lucky enough to start out, and I got started in programming as the assistant to the head basketball programmer at the time, a guy by the name of Tom Ojakjian, who now works at the American Conference. And, he hired me, gave me a chance, brought me out of the finance department at ESPN, where I spent 3 years. And so that's where I kind of really learned how to approach a schedule from an overall standpoint and just identify what teams were looking for on their games. And so we tried to put games together and really use those games that we put together to put a stronger lineup of games together for our ESPN basketball schedule. That was it. And I really got into it just trying to get two teams to play each other that ordinarily might not have wanted to play each other, and do a home and home series so that we could televise one game one year and hopefully get the series back the next year and televise it again. So that's how I got into the whole role of trying to put together the best possible schedule for a television network and a sport in particular.
And that had to be very nuanced in terms of football. And some of the things you mentioned earlier with conferences expanding and schools moving around. I was a football player on the team at Michigan State. And, we always, every year, we would obviously play Michigan, but you can look forward to playing Notre Dame every year, and you could look forward at the end of the year to playing Penn State, right? Which were naturally our rivals, Penn State, because we were one of the first couple agricultural schools in the country, and then Notre Dame just goes back. They played us when Michigan wouldn't play us back in the early 1900s, so it just was natural rivalries, and then those go away over time, right? Because conferences expand and scheduling and all those type of things. So it's interesting that you have to look at that, and I wonder. Back to Gridiron being a software, are people, is it they subscribe to it? Are they members? Or tell me about that aspect of it, because there's a people aspect to it too, right? I mean, in terms of it being a business, but then you have to communicate with people and relationships and all those things. So I want to talk about those things.
Yeah, I mean, basically everybody, whether it's a conference or an individual school, they just pay one rate per year, and then that allows them to subscribe to the service. And if there are 2 or 3 people at a particular school that want to use it, it's all one price. So it's a subscription service, and they can use the software as much as they need to, and for any time for one price. And then I'll go through, and schedulers do change. People come and go, jobs change. And so there's always a bit of a turnover to it. New people get assigned to it. But with each and every school, we spend time looking at what they want to try to accomplish. And I'll keep a laundry list of stuff that they're working on. And we just go in there and we dive into it, and we see what we can do to come up with a few options to solve the issues that they currently need to get after. And that's really the second part of it. The computer can spit out some good ideas for you. You have to look at each idea and then go in there and really get to work on solving the problem that you'd like to get solved. So there's a big human element too. And you have to reach across conferences, reach across schools, and communicate with people, try to sell them on a certain idea so that we can go in there and try to get everything squared away for everybody across the board.
Like you mentioned, they're on the computer, they're in the software, and they do what they need to do to the best that they can get what they need to get done. But there probably still some legwork that needs to get done. So are you the person talking to a variety of parties, or at least connecting people and saying, here's a possible option, you guys work this out? Or tell me about that part of the nuance of the company.
Yeah. Yep. No doubt about it. That's a fair amount of what I do. I try to reach across and ask other people if they will move a game so that somebody else can achieve something. And obviously, if you're going to ask somebody to move a game, you need to know that it's going to work for them. I mean, you just have to have. There's some stuff that just won't work for people. I mean, but I have a pretty good idea if I call somebody whether something will work or not. It doesn't always work, but most of the time when I pick up the phone and call somebody and ask them to do something, I got a pretty good idea that it certainly could work for them and might have a shot to go. I mean, there's some stuff you just don't ask. You don't ask people to go 3 weeks in a row on the road. They won't do it. So any solution that involves that, you just can't even put up on the skyline because it simply won't pass. I mean, it's things like that. You go in there and you just have a pretty good idea of what will work for people, and you try to design the solutions around that.
Okay. I'll make an assumption. Are all of the FBS conferences subscribers? And if they aren't, how do you work around? It seems like you need all in, or it becomes a problem when people aren't in, I think.
Well, I'm lucky enough to have I think in the FBS, I have everybody. There's one conference that doesn't use it, but 9 out of 10 do. And in all 10 schools in that conference use it. So in the FCS, there are a few schools that I don't have. Out of the 125 FCS schools, I'm thinking I probably have 115 of them. So I've got pretty much everybody on board. And I know I'm lucky enough, having worked in this business for quite a while, I'm lucky enough to know most of these people. And so we can always reach across and figure out what we need to get done.
So now I'd imagine now, we're in this current pandemic chapter of world history, and a lot of conferences are not doing fall sports. Some schools individually may not be doing fall sports. I think most of FBS is still on board. So at the current moment, how busy are your phones? How busy is the software like in overdrive now as people try to figure out how to reschedule? Because a lot of FCS conferences are dropping off, and you got to get these buy-in games. And if you get one domino on the FBS level, who knows what'll happen after that. So I just wonder about how busy you are in terms of like preventing your hair from falling out kind of situation, right?
Oh, it's more than manageable, and this is a little bit of an unprecedented time, no doubt about it. But in terms of the scheduling aspect of it, there are many things that certainly outweigh that, and what the commissioners are working on, and the presidents and the athletic directors, and how they might structure the season to keep everybody safe. That's far and away the biggest issue of the day, not so much the scheduling part of it. You are quite correct. I mean, obviously here, with all the folks here between the Big Ten and the Pac-12 deciding to play a conference-only schedule, and some of the FCS conferences here choosing not to participate in the fall, there's some people out there that need games. There's no doubt about it. And this is a little bit of a unique time because usually, as I alluded to before, when I look at somebody's schedule, I have a pretty good idea of exactly what they're trying to accomplish, whether they need a home game, a road game, whether they're trying to sell one to bring some guarantee money in or buy one. These are things you always know right off the bat by looking at the schedule. In this time, Ty, it's much different because I think principally now you would just want to look and see who's open, who needs a game that day. Because in this environment where most teams in the FBS would want to play 6 home games, they might be willing to drop down to 5 just because they might not want to host another game. They might be more willing to go on the road. And then I think one other thing that comes into it is I think by and large, it's probably a plus in terms of if somebody can drive to a game rather than having to fly. A, it saves costs. B, it might be, just an easier thing to accomplish in this environment from a safety standpoint. So those are the things that come into it. But I tell people all the time, we lose games to weather events all the time. And it's not, and these guys are pros. These guys and girls that do it are pros. They know what they're doing. And so they don't get rattled by it. They simply take a look and see who's available. I'm not sure anybody's going to spend 15 hours right now working on a contract. But everybody in this business knows each other. So they'll look to see, hey, what are my options? What if, I'd rather have a schedule than not have a schedule. And so they'll call the people they know and what possible options they think work for them. And they'll spend some time on it to make sure that if there is a schedule and it's done as planned or not done as planned, do they have a schedule that they can work with given the guidelines that they've received from the conferences. So I'm sure everybody's in there taking a look at what might work for them given the openings they have, and they'll be ready and they'll just develop a short list of prospects so they can proceed as necessary.
Right. Are you preparing your software and your brain trust for a possible spring season if things end up not happening in the fall?
Sure. About the only thing that I've talked to the people that do my software coding is because, one thing, Gridiron, I always want to make sure that it's an accurate site and all the games are in there and up to date as humanly practicable. So if there is a spring season, then obviously we'd want to make sure that we're set up to accommodate a spring season. So you have to spend a little bit of time with your developers making sure that the software is in fact capable of handling it, and that's basically the only thing I've done. In terms of if the decision is made to go to a spring season, I'll read it online along with everybody else. I mean, that's really how it will fly. No one asks me, and nor should they, because it wouldn't be helpful to them. These guys, if there's going to be a spring season, they'll lay out the parameters and get the athletic directors and presidents on board within the conference, and they'll release it, and then we'll take it from there once we have that news. I think in a situation like this, it's a little bit like dealing with a weather event. You really want to deal with the knowns. You don't want to spend a ton of time working on the unknowns. You always have to think about it a little bit. What if this conference, chooses not to play? What if they do? But if I have openings on my schedule and I'm sitting here today and I want to try to get some things penciled in so that I know that I have a schedule if I need a schedule, then you can only deal with the people that are currently open. That's the best way to get something done as quickly as possible. When things get canceled officially, then obviously you can go in and you may have a larger pool of options to work with based on somebody canceling. But until that in effect happens, you're dealing in speculation and not reality. So that's probably the biggest takeaway I would give people right now is, hey, look to see who's currently open, who's definitely open, because those are people are in position to say yes today. For some other people, you don't know when or if it might happen, and so you just have to take it as it comes.
Take it as it comes, and like you mentioned, and like any smart business person, you always have to be nimble for when the time comes and you have to adjust, then you'll adjust accordingly. Dave, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Ty, thank you so much for your time. It was my pleasure, and I really appreciate it.
That was Dave Brown. He is the founder and president of Gridiron. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.